This is a very important unit. This is about consumer protection. This is about relationships. So when you hear the word agency, we're talking about relationships, relationships between the buyer and the seller, relationships between the agent and the principal, relationships between the client and the agent. So there's a lot of different things going on with this unit, and so that's why it's important to get a good understanding of agency relationships. So there's three different kinds of law when we talk about agency, right? We're talking about what are the three kinds of law that have helped to create this whole world of agency?
Common, statutory, and administrative.
Right? So when we say common, right? Thank you, myself. When we say common, we're really kind of talking about common law, traditions, court decisions, things that have been in play for quite a long time. That the agency relationships, the relationships between people have acquired. So I just kind of want to take a step back, right? And I'm not going to call anybody out, but I'm looking at some faces, right? And I want to say, number one, remember, don't feel like there's a blockage if you're not starting at unit 1, because there's no story here. There's no novel. You don't have to learn any characters. If you started at unit 1, it would make no difference than if you started at unit 5 or unit 12. So please don't make that a blockage in your mind. The second thing is, I know many of you, it was kind of given a last minute thing to be able to join today. So if you didn't get a chance to read, that's fine. That's understandable. But I'm going to ask you in the future to read at least 80% of the time before the class, because otherwise you're going to be a little bit lost, and we're going to do a quiz in a little while. And you're going to be like, a quiz? Yeah. We got to learn this stuff, right? And I don't collect the quizzes. I don't really, worry 100% about your answers, but I want to know that you can pass this thing. So if you're not getting at least 80% correct, then you should probably be making sure that you are studying a little bit more, okay? So the first one was common law. The second one that Marcella mentioned is statutory law. So when we say statutory law, what are we mainly talking about? Who knows?
Legislative.
Right? Legislative. So what does that mean? That means that there was a governing body, and usually when we're talking about a governing body, we would be talking about the state of Connecticut, right? There was a governing body. The state reps and the state senators are over there, and then boom, boom, boom. And then the third one is administrative law, which I think is the most dangerous, because administrative law, right, are decisions that are being made by people who are in real estate commissions or positions that they were not necessarily voted in, but they were. Does that make sense to you? Right? So like I used to tell, I tell sometimes a story about the guy that I used to know. He's passed away. I actually drove by his house today, and he was on the real estate commission for a lot of years. And he was appointed by Jody Rell, right? And he was afraid that once DNL came into office, anybody remember DNL? Mr. Malloy?
Yes.
Right? But he was afraid that once DNL came into office, he was actually, he wasn't really afraid, but he was thinking he would probably get taken off the real estate commission. Because usually to get on one of these commissions, you pretty much just have to be a friend of the governor, right? Or maybe helped him or her out in their campaign and so forth. But he was on the real estate commission, and so he was telling me he used to tell me a lot of stories. Just a little sidetrack story. He would tell me, that he'd get these people who would come in. He'd always say guys. I'm sure most of them were guys. Yes.
Didn't you tell us that he won Real Estate Agent of the Year in Florida or something?
Oh yeah, that was our governor. You didn't see that? That's good. So yeah, that was another story. I want to get. All right, let me tell that one first, Cliff, because that's a good one. Did anyone see who the real estate agent of the year in Florida was voted as? It just came out a couple of weeks ago. It was on Facebook. The real estate agent of the year for Florida. Nobody saw who it was. Do you think it was me? No, right? Guess who it was? It was our governor, Ned Lamont.
Oh, really?
Well, think about it this way. I was flying through, Facebook about 3 weeks ago. I was telling Cliff, I was flying through Facebook. You know how it is. You look at a picture, you keep going, keep going. Then I see real estate agent of the year, Florida. I'm like, whatever, because I see all kinds of stuff about all these agents with all these wonderful awards. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I went back to it, and it was a picture of Governor Ned Lamont, real estate agent of the year in Florida, because basically all these people in Connecticut want to move to Florida. In fact, I just had dinner with my wife. Right before the class, and she was telling us how there's another friend of ours, which this seems to happen like every 3 to 5 weeks. She's moving to Florida. She went to Florida during the quarantine, and she's like, that's it. I'm staying down in Florida. So she's coming back, getting all her stuff, and she's a hairdresser. She's totally upset, mad, angry. She had a nice, beautiful place in Wethersfield. No money coming in for 2 months, right? So she's gonna move to Florida, open up a hairdressing place, and get her real estate license. Isn't that pretty wild, right?
Wow.
So, but getting back to the class, right? Common law, statutory law, and administrative law. So those are the three ways where agency came about. Now, in your wonderful book, they put together a little term called caveat emptor. So what does that mean, caveat emptor? So you get to learn international international languages. We go through everything in this class.
Buyer beware.
Let the buyer beware. So they'll tell you, and again, if you want to try to follow along in your electronic book or in your regular book or whatever you have, we're under the history of agency. They say in the 1950s, the common law doctrine of caveat emptor, which means let the buyer beware, was the norm. And I can tell you, I still believe it's that way. If you're a buyer, you need to be careful. Right? You need to understand what you're buying. You need to be able to inspect the property. You need to be able to make sure that you understand the zoning of the property and so forth. So there's a lot involved. Now, of course, since then, there's been a lot of laws that have been put in place to make it easier for buyers. But really, they still have to be careful, correct? Makes sense? All right. And so then we go into... Good. So who's an agent? What does it mean to be an agent? Is a salesperson an agent? Yes or no? Yeah. How about a broker? Is a broker an agent? Right? So really, what does it mean to be an agent? When are you an agent for somebody?
When you're representing a client.
That's right. When you're representing someone, and then once you're representing them, that's when we talk about cold AC, and we talk about the fiduciary obligations. So right now, some of you are like, cold AC, oh man, what's going on? This guy's talking about all craziness. Well, by the end of this class, you're going to know what cold AC means, right? So we're going to talk about cold AC. And as an agent, now you're representing them. You're helping them to get to where they need. And usually what you should really have is a signed agreement. Is there a law that says you need a signed agreement? No. Right? But if you want to get paid in the state of Connecticut for it to be enforceable, you need a written agreement. So we're going to be talking about those sort of things. Okay? A principal. So who is a principal when it comes to real estate?
The client.
Right? The client. Somebody who's hiring you, right? They're the buyer or the seller or the landlord or the tenant, you are working on their behalf. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Fiduciary obligations are the things that are basically in which the agent is held in a position of trust and confidence by the principal. Then we have client and customer. Okay, so what is the everybody's heard of the word client before, and everybody's probably heard of the word customer. So when it comes to real estate and your yellow book, right, what's the difference between those two? What's the difference between a client and a customer?
A client has a signed agreement.
Client has, now Tina is right, but remember there's always a little bit of spin on things. So with a client, you have a signed agreement. That's how it should be in the state of Connecticut. But could you shake hands and say, and that person and say, hey, will you be my agent to help me buy my house? And you shake their hand. Well, you're not allowed to shake hands anymore, right? That's bad. That's bad. You guys are being naughty. That's the olden days. You have to do like an elbow bump, or you have to do like a leg thing. Oh, I can't even lift my leg that high, right? You gotta hit each other's ankles or something. I don't know what the heck they're doing now. But I shook somebody's hand today. It was really kind of weird. I was like, oh my God, I got to get back to my car and put my Lysol wipes on my hand. This is crazy. I'm living on the edge, right? But it doesn't have to be in writing. It has to be stated. Hey, will you sell my house? Yes, I'll sell your house. Great. And most of the time, again, to be enforceable in the state of Connecticut, yes, it has to be in writing. But it's not exactly, right? But basically the broker is going to represent someone in the relationship, and then they become the client. Now you as the salesperson are representing that person too on behalf of the broker, or you're authorized by the broker. Does that make sense? All right, good. And then the customer is who? Somebody who is out there in the marketplace, but you necessarily are not representing them. Okay? But does that mean that you still have to be honest with them and fair with them? Yes. However, here's where we get into trickiness. Here's how we have problems in our industry. Here's, in my opinion, why real estate agents are not looked at as very professional and are not really trusted 1,000%, is because many people do not know how to treat a client and a customer different. Does that sound bad? Oh, Rob, that's not very nice of you. You're not treating your customers nice. You're not treating your customers as good as your clients. No, I'm not. Because if you're my customer, if you're a customer, did you sign an agreement with me? Do we have any loyalty to each other? Could you, right? If you were just a customer out there and I decide to show you a house, right? Could you look at the house with me, tell me how great everything is, and then tomorrow morning have your cousin who's a real estate agent write up the offer and get paid? Yeah, because you're a customer. Yeah. Right? So a client, and that's why, you have to have a good understanding. And I had a meeting, I was supposed to have a meeting last week, had a meeting this week with this morning with my team. And I said, and we talked about what are the 8 steps to having a buyer become your client, right? Because there's a difference. Once a person becomes your client, then you are held to a higher level, and you should really expect that client to be held to a little bit higher level, right? Because you're supposed to be giving your clients VIP treatment, right? You're supposed to be doing all these wonderful things for your client to show them that you are going to help them every step of the way. And then, so does everyone understand the difference between a client and a customer? Who's got questions on that? Okay, because that's a big one. So We also have what's called a non-agent, or it might be referred to as a facilitator, or intermediary, or transactional broker, or transaction coordinator, or a contract broker. Those are all the same things it'll talk about under definitions under real estate agency, right? And so in the state of Connecticut, do we allow that? Is that acceptable? Non-agent? No. Why not? So a non-agent is somebody, think about it this way, right? Non-agent is somebody that in other states, so remember, when we're talking about what we're going through is this yellow book. And this yellow book is the general, they're national, right? So in other states, do they allow it? Yes. In Connecticut, no. Because in Connecticut, they want to make sure that it's understood one person is working on behalf of that person, right? That there's representation, that there's loyalty, that there's trust, that there's care, that there's obedience, which we're going to talk about those things. So if somebody was to come along to you here in Connecticut and say, hey, I've been involved with real estate for a long time, and you say, well, I want to make an offer, but I really don't want to work with an agent. And they say, well, just give me $500 and I'll do the paperwork for you. Right? I won't represent you. I won't be your agent. Just give me $500 and I'll just do the paperwork. See, that's not acceptable in Connecticut. We don't allow that, right? Because there could be some issues that will come up where people will be needing some help and some support and some representation. So does that make sense? All right, who's got questions on that? Okay. So remember, they talk about that, the relationship between the principal or the client and the agent must be consensual. The principal delegates the authority. They're your boss. In America, we hate that, right? Everybody hates to say, oh, I'm going into real estate because I want to be my own boss. Well, guess what? You're not going to be your own boss, just so you know. You're going to have people, your clients, who are going to be telling you what to do. And you're going to be like, oh man, this is kind of tough. Yeah, it is really tough, right? So remember, you have to be obedient to them. And the agent then, though, you have to consent to act. Because if they're asking you to do something that's not ethical, that could turn into an issue too. Right? So, they know that their house floods every spring. Right now it's dry, and you know that their house floods every spring, and you're like, hey, don't most of the houses in this area flood every spring? And they're like, yeah, but we don't need to talk about that right now. Well, is this a person you want to work for? Right? You might have to think twice about it. Is it going to really make sense for you to be working with someone that's going to be asking you to lie to other people? That could be an issue, right? In my mind, that would probably be an issue. Does that make sense to you? So you want to definitely think about some of that stuff if something like that's going to make sense to you. All right. Creation of agency. So when we talk about agency, we're talking about two parts. We're talking about expressed and implied. So what is expressed and implied? What's the difference between the two? Who knows? What's the difference between those two, expressed and implied? I'm sorry, my camera's just a little bit off and it's driving me crazy. So who knows the difference between those two, expressed and implied agency?
Say express is something that you have either signed or you've said, yes, we're going to do this. Implied is we really haven't made that formal agreement, but we're acting as if we're working together.
That's right. And you see, that's where we run into problems a lot. That's where we have issues. That's where we have lawsuits. That's where we have to get into arbitration and mediation. That's where we have a low level of professionalism. That's where we show that we're not confident about our abilities. So what do I mean by all this stuff? Right now, it is almost 6:30 or something like that. I'm trying to look at my clock, but I got all things going on, right? And if I told you, hey, I want you to call 10 agents and see how many agents will show you a house at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Do you think you can find some agents that will show you a house that you never met before, that you never signed anything with, and they'll show you a house tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock? Anybody think they could find some agents like that? Yes, no, maybe. Are you still there with me? Did we lose you? I think it right. When you can only afford 150. Right? And so is it the right thing to do for an agent just to show you houses because they're going to kind of like smooth themselves into the deal? That's the problem that we have. That's the way it's not supposed to work. It's supposed to be that on the first meeting, you talk with them about what it is you do for your clients, how awesome you are. You then get the agreement that you're going to work together, right? Even if it's only for one showing or for 30 days or for 3 months, but that's how it's supposed to work. Then you start talking about financing. Then you start talking about what they can afford and what their credit score is and how things look for them as far as their timeline. But if you're asking anything personal about their financials or their life before you have a client rep agreement signed, that's an ethical violation. In fact, there's only one instance. So there's been a couple of you in class lately when we went over this. What's that? Losing me again?
Yeah, we're losing it.
I don't know. Right now,
get out that beach.
I know. Right now, I'm showing 4 out of 5 internet bars. I don't know if it's
That's
Zoom.
your microphone. You're going digital on us. That's all. Your video's fine. That you were going digital on the voice.
Yeah, it's got to be because of the internet. I'm sorry, guys. So, yeah, this whole thing about expressed agreements is that you need to be able to have a written agreement or stated. It has to be stated. Hey, will you let me be your agent if I show you this house? Yes, I'll let you be your agent. Will you allow me to sell your house and we're going to do it for 3 months and put it at this price and have a start date and end date? Yes, I'll let you do it. Otherwise, it becomes an issue and it becomes an implied agreement. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So remember, implied agreements, they can be created unintentionally, right? They can be created inadvertently. They can be created accidentally through actions. And that's where there's a problem. It's you don't have somebody who's working with you just because you have the license and they don't. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
All right. So remember, we have to disclose our agency status, and that's where I was going. So when is the one time, though, that you necessarily can start talking with people? And see, this is good for you to know as a consumer out there. So when is the one time that you can start talking with people, asking them all their financial information, asking them this, talking with them about that, and then not even have a client rep agreement?
None of that was working for us, Rob.
Yeah, this is crazy. So when is the one time, right, that you can talk with people about their financials, talk with them about everything under the sun, and that you'll be able to actually tell the seller? Anybody have an idea?
When they agree to work with you?
Well, I'm saying, let's say you don't even ask them to work with you. When can you do that? An open house. Okay? So think about it this way. When you conduct an open house, one of the things that you have to do is you have to put one of those little tent signs up on the countertop near all the documents and where they're supposed to register their name and so forth. And that document, that little tent sign is going to say that they understand that at that moment you're working for the seller. And basically anything they say and so forth, you are supposed to share with the seller. Right? So that's an important thing to remember, and that's why there's a lot of complexities, because I mean, I can tell you right now, I had a new agent about 3 months ago specifically, and I kind of shied her away from working with our team any longer, because what happened the first time, and she was probably pretty good, but the first time she called me up and she's like, Rob, I talked to this person and here's their credit score and they make this amount of money and they do this and they do this. You think that they can buy a house because they want to buy a house with me? I'm sorry, guys. Now, I know we got a lot going on here today. So whoever it is, we're going to mute you. We're going to mute everybody. Right? And then you can mute. Sorry. That's all right. So here's this new agent of mine, and she's like, oh, I am going to, here's their credit score, here's their this, here's their that. Can they buy a house with us? Or can we help them buy a house? So what do you think, as me being her coach, her mentor, her training, what's the first question I asked her?
Did you sign an agreement?
Yeah, did you sign an agreement with the buyer? And what do you think she said? Oh, no, we didn't do that yet. We just wanted to get all the other stuff out of the way. And then I was going to ask them about signing an agreement with me.
Right.
So I had to tell her, listen, that's an ethical violation. That person can feel ultimately like you pulled them in and you took all their financial information, confidential info, and didn't disclose agency with them and actually try to sue you or get your license suspended or revoked. And then I can get in trouble. And then Berkshire Hathaway, which is truly your broker, can get in trouble. So, oh, okay, Rob, I see what you're saying. And then 10 days, 2 weeks went by. Hey, Rob, so anyways, I was talking to this person again. They want to start looking at houses tomorrow morning. And I know you said you'd help me out and show me how to do that. Can we do that? I said, yeah, send me over the buy rep agreement. Oh, I didn't do that yet with them. So I said to her, hey, do you want me to meet up with you and this person together and we can talk about it and talk about what it is that we're going to do? I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. I'm like, are you kidding me? But you see, that's a typical thing. Go ahead. Somebody have a comment? See, that's a typical thing with new agents, is because you necessarily might not feel like you have all the knowledge, all the experience, but you have to build it yourself. You have to go to your coach, your mentor, your trainer and say, hey, how can I put together some sort of brochure, something that's going to explain what I'm going to do to help you, because that is a big thing. That's where we run into issues. So I think we kind of beat the horse to death as far as the listing agreement, the expressed agreement. Who has questions on that between implied and expressed and the way that works, agency relationship? So remember, at the first meeting, that's the term that you have to remember. And it's hard to do. Right? It's hard to do. I'm not going to lie. But let me ask you, how many doctors or nurses or accountants or attorneys or dentists are going to work with you, spend their time with you before you sign any kind of documents or fill out any kind of paperwork? How many? Does anybody know one? No. They're looking to get your insurance card like this. right? They're looking to get a retainer fee for an attorney like this. This one lady was telling me this morning, oh, I have a half an hour consultation with my attorney. I'm like, what do you mean you have a half an hour consultation? He said he'd give me 30 minutes just to talk with him quickly before about my scenario before he'd have to charge me a retainer fee. I'm like, are you serious? This is a true story. I'm like, man, that's how I got to be as a real estate agent. Right? So then that's where we're going. The next step, compensation. Right? So first of all, there's this thing that we need to make sure we understand. The source of compensation does not determine agency. So what does that mean? Technically, a buyer agent, who technically pays or where is the real source of that money coming from when you get paid as a buyer agent?
You get paid by your
The selling broker.
You get the money from your broker, but where's the original source of the money?
Seller.
From a percentage from the seller.
From
Yeah.
the seller, right? And are you representing the seller? No. So the whole point is that it doesn't matter necessarily the source, right? An agent does not necessarily represent the person who pays the commission, the true source of the commission. Yes, as a licensed real estate agent in the state of Connecticut, you can technically only get paid from your broker. You can only receive money from your broker. But the true source of it is the seller. Are we having a problem again with the speaker? Yeah? No? I don't know. Because I just saw my internet go like that down and up. And I think something's going on. I don't know if there's going to be a thunderstorm or something. I don't know.
No, you're good.
Okay. So there's also something called gratuitous agency. What does that mean?
For free.
For free, right? So technically an agency can exist even if no fee is involved. So if you want to be that nonprofit real estate agent, God bless you. It's something that you could do if you want to do. Raise your hand if you want to do it. You know, I'll give you an amen. Nonprofit. All right. And so when we talk about compensation, we're also discussing that it could be a percentage of the sales price. It could be a flat fee, right? It could be a lot of different ways that you're going to be getting compensated. And it's going to depend on your agreement with that particular buyer. Make sense? All right. Fiduciary responsibilities or obligations. Who's ready for the cold AC? I know you're all going to be ready for some cold AC, hopefully in like 4 weeks from now, the end of June. So cold air conditioning, right? These are basically the duties that you have to your client. So the first one, beginning with a C, stands for what? Care. See, I saw Damaris yawn and she said the word care at the same time. Good job, right? So care. You have to exercise a reasonable amount of care or degree of care while transacting the business, right? That is a skill because you might say that you care, right? But are you putting yourself before your client? I think I might have told some of you a couple weeks back, I have this young couple, they're looking at a house, right? And they decided to make an offer on it. And the offer got accepted. And so now I found out, I'm sorry, who's ever got that noise there, if you can mute yourself, I appreciate it. So now I get a phone call from the listing agent. And things get a little bit tricky. So, the listing agent says, hey, Rob, I just want to let you know that we believe there's nothing documented. The house is listed really by U.S. Like by one of these banks, right? But we believe it has the crumbling foundation issue, but we're not sure, right? So here I was, I'm gonna, make a couple grand from this, and everybody needs the money and da 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 da. Could I have just let that comment go like this and not say anything? You could do that. But is that an ethical violation? Yes. Is that showing care for your client? No. So I actually called up my client right away and I'm like, listen, if you guys still really love this house and you want to buy it, great. But it probably has crumbling foundation. And he's a younger guy and it's a nice, beautiful home, a big, beautiful home in Thailand. And he's looking to me and he's like, Rob, he's like, well, what would you do? And I said, I wouldn't buy it. He's like, yeah, but it might not have crumbling foundation. I said, yeah, but it might. And he's like, so you just wouldn't buy it? I said, listen, if I love the house. So now he's trying to talk me into talking him into buying the house. You see what I'm saying? Like, he didn't like that I was just being so straightforward. Like, I wouldn't buy it. Either, number one, I wouldn't buy it because he stands to make a lot of money by buying it because it's an REO and they're hard to get approved. Or number two, I would spend the $1,500 if I really loved it so much and get the core testing done on the foundation. And he's like, yeah, but my uncle told me that I can have an engineer come and look at it. And the engineer can tell me, and that'll only cost me like $400 or $500. I said, yeah, who's an engineer? I said, it's just some guy who's been in construction for like 30 years. And yeah, they probably know a lot, but it's a visual inspection. That still doesn't tell you if it exactly has the crumbling foundation issue that's going on in Connecticut. So are people familiar with the crumbling foundation concern? Right. So basically, just to give you the quick synopsis is for about 20 years, I forget the exact dates, the late 1980s to about 2010, for like 30 years, 30 years, there was a location that they were making all the concrete from. There's actually 2 or 3 different locations. And supposedly there was this one mineral called pyrite, which was ending up in the concrete, and too high of concentrations of this pyrite makes it crumble after so many years. Right? And so now we found out that there's houses mostly in the northeast of Connecticut, but they're also we found out even as far as in Simsbury and Granby and so forth, that they have this level of pyrite in there. And now it's costing, between $100,000 and $150,000 to get this foundations redone. Right? And again, I'm sorry, I don't make things political, but I tell the truth the way I feel. Guess who do the insurance? If you can buy this house and then find out that now it has this foundation problem that's going to cost $125,000 to fix, is your homeowner's insurance going to cover you? No. Guess who let them off the hook? All the wonderful people that voted for Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal signed documents that let the insurance companies off the hook when he was Attorney General for the state of Connecticut. So now, even like just today, we got all the wonderful stores that can be open, the big corporations, but we can't let the little stores open up. All right. So anyways, that's the whole thing about care, right? The real estate broker is expected to help that buyer or salesperson every step of the way and care about what happens, putting the client first. Cold AC. O. What's O stand for? Who knows?
Obedience.
Obedience. You have to listen to this guy. I think I told you this story really quick. I had this one guy, house was listed for $295,000. The guy told me, go tell the seller I'll buy it for $225 even cash. I'm like, listen, that's like 75, 80 grand different. That's $80,000. He's not going to go for it. Oh, that's what I want to make an offer for. Let him know. I said, well, he says that he wants to get written offers. No, just tell him $225 and we'll see what we can do. So you have to obey your client. If you don't want to, you can stop working with them. You can say, hey, listen, we're probably not going to mix well together, or I'm not sure I agree with what you want to do. But the whole point is, if you want to be their agent, meaning that you're so stuck on getting paid from that transaction, right? You have to listen to them, as long as it's not unlawful or unethical. Okay? The third letter, L, what does that stand for?
I'm here, nothing you said.
Can't hear me?
Loyalty.
Loyalty, right? So the duty of loyalty requires that the agent place the principal's interest above all those, right? You have to be loyal, okay? You cannot act out of self-interest. You have to try to negotiate the strongest you can for them. Next letter for cold AC is what?
D, duty, disclosure.
Disclosure. Disclosure of material facts. So what makes a fact material when it comes to real estate? What's a material fact?
Almost any new information.
Right? What else? Anybody else have? I mean, that's part of it.
Identity.
Identity, you said? Well, here's what real estate material facts are. We're going to learn about this. Is basically any kind of fact that will persuade a buyer to want to buy or not buy. Right? So, like, is it your duty to make sure you tell them, oh, hey, that closet door in the second bedroom has a hole in it? What do you think?
No, because they can see it themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, is that a material fact? Oh, I want to remember to tell you that the window in the basement has a crack in it. I mean, is that going to really persuade them to want to buy the house or not? But if you know that the house has lead or the basement floods, it's important facts that's going to really persuade somebody. You know that they want to buy a horse farm that can have 5 horses, but this farm can only have 2. Right? Material fact. You know that they want a house that has the ability to put a bonus room above the garage. They told you that. They said, listen, we want to have a house that we can put a bonus room above the garage. But you've already talked to the owner and they said there's no way you can really do that. Should you be letting them know that? Yeah. Right? So that's a material fact. Relevant information that you should know, that you should be telling your clients if they say that it's important enough to them. Right? So that's disclosure. Disclosing the identity of prospective purchasers. Right? The disclosing the purchaser's ability. So if you know that the purchaser of this particular house has never seen it. So what do I mean by that? Let's think about that. You are the listing agent, right? And somebody makes an offer on a house, but they've never seen it. And how do you know that? Because you get to find out as, you get the list of the showing agents, and then you talk to the showing agent after you get the offer and you say, hey, when did you guys come and take a look at the house? And they're like, oh, we haven't seen the house yet. We figured we'd just make an offer, see if it gets accepted. Should you let your seller know that? So you have to disclose whatever it is you know about that particular buyer to your seller, so that there's no questions, there's no problems, and so forth. All right? So those are things that are really important, is disclosure. We're going to even talk more about that. Accountability. What's accountability all about? Can't hear me? Ah. All right, so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. We're going to take 1 minute off the clock, Brian. I'm going to reset my computer one more time and we'll see if it makes it better. But I don't think it's my computer. I think it's the internet service, but maybe it'll help it out. Okay? So let's try. Accountability, when it comes to accounting, right? We have two terms that we have to know: commingling and conversion. So what's the difference between those two? Commingling and conversion. Let's start with one of them. What is commingling?
Commingling is if you took a deposit check and put it into your personal account rather than the escrow account.
That's right. So you as a salesperson, you really don't have to worry too much about this, because whenever you receive any kind of money, you're supposed to be giving it to who? Your broker. Your broker's supposed to take care of it. But I knew this one broker from another real estate company, which was...
Losing you again.
Yeah. So I mean, I know a real estate broker who ended up using the money or putting it in his account, and he got caught for that. Right? He got in big time trouble. So that's commingling. Now, what's conversion?
Using that money.
That's right. So remember, you cannot use it for your own personal use. So commingling is putting it into, mixing it with the business funds and the escrow account. Because technically, there's supposed to be a separate account. Do you need to know this as a salesperson? No. Well, you need to know it for the state exam, but you're not going to be dealing with it. Right? And then conversion is actually using that money. So does that make sense to you? All right, so now you know the difference between commingling and conversion. Confidentiality, which is the last one. So I think we pretty much understand about confidential, right? You have to be careful every little thing you say. But guess what? If you, and I know some of you are young, you're going to have no clue of what I'm talking about. But if you're a good agent, you have to play Columbo. Who knows Columbo? Peter Falk, right? I know half of you are like, I don't know what the heck this guy is talking about. He keeps going off on all these weird things, right? You have to ask questions, right? You're selling a house for your seller. You're representing your seller, right? So when you get an offer, should you be asking that buyer's agent like 25 questions about their client? If you want to be good, yes. And go back to your seller and tell them everything, yes. You might be like, oh, Rob, that's not right. That's not ethical. Well, who are you working for? Your seller. Should you be telling your seller that that maybe the person just got laid off for the furlough of they got furloughed for COVID-19 and it's going to take them an extra 3 weeks to have the closing? Yes. Because you're representing the seller. Should you be telling your seller, hey, this person looked at 4 other houses and they chose yours, but if something comes up big in the inspection, they're going to walk away? Maybe the buyer's agent told you that? Yes. Right? So there's a lot of things that if you talk to that buyer's agent, you play Columbo, you ask investigative questions, go back to your seller is going to love you for that. Or vice versa. Should you, I have more than one buyer where I met the seller and I asked the seller as many questions as I could to find out, hey, why are you selling? What if he told me, oh, because my basement floods? Why are you selling? When do you want to sell? Where are you looking to move to, and so forth, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do to go back and tell your seller or your buyer, vice versa, right? So I think you understand the whole thing about confidentiality. And sometimes it comes into play where we have an issue when we talk about agency relationships, specifically dual agency. So who knows what's dual agency? Who knows what's dual agency?
Representing both the buyer and the seller.
That's right. So you as that agent or even the broker, which we're going to talk more about this in about 5-10 minutes, but that's where dual agency comes a lot of times conflicts, or people feel that it does, because you have the same broker or the same salesperson representing both parties. So we're going to talk more about that. But let's talk about types of agency relationships. We'll keep going forward with the order of the book, right? Types of agency relationships. So we have universal agent, general agent, special agent. So for those of you that got a chance to read before the class, what kind of agent is a real estate agent usually?
What was your question again?
What kind of agent is usually a real estate agent?
General? No, special.
All right, Marcella, you're getting the 5-star award for today. Special agent. So what is a special agent? Basically, someone who's authorized to represent someone for one specific act. So they hire you to sell their house, you sell their house, right? They hire you to help them buy a house, they buy a house. And then it's pretty much over, vice versa, right? It's one specific act that you help them get to the closing with. Now, how about like someone like a property manager? What does a property manager do on a daily basis? What are some of the things a property manager does on a daily basis?
Maintenance, things like that.
Maintenance. What else?
Collect rent.
Rentals, collecting rents with tenants. What else?
Well, screen for tenants.
Screening for tenants. Maybe talking. Go ahead.
Marketing the property or the rental.
Marketing property. So you see, there's a list of things that they're doing, and that's kind of what we consider to be a broad range of matters, right? There's more than one thing that they're doing. The scope of what they have for the authority from their client is larger, right? Like they can, 1 minute, they could be signing a lease with a tenant, right? The next minute, they could be paying an invoice to the plumber. The next minute, they could be hiring the landscaper, right? So they can do a broad range of matters. So that is usually what we call a general agent. Does that make sense? Right? And then what's a universal agent?
They can do just about anything.
Yeah, they basically have the authority to basically act on behalf of the principal. Is virtually unlimited, and that's usually like, it might be someone who's a court appointed, a guardian. It might be somebody, an attorney. And real estate agents, we usually don't have all that permission. We usually don't have all that power. So if you want to have a lot of power, don't become a real estate agent, because you're going to have like this much power, just so you know. You really hardly have power over anything. So if you're power hungry, don't get into real estate. Am I talking all of you out of being real estate agents yet? Okay. So again, we talked about, in the beginning of the class, we really talked about disclosure of agency, and when do you have to disclose and discuss agency? When should you do that? Disclose and discuss agency. At the first meeting. All right, so that's important to know. Okay, at the first meeting, you should be explaining to buyers or sellers what agency alternatives there are, what it is you're going to do, how you're going to do it. Because here's a quick little example. Maybe there's this buyer and they're only available on Sundays, and you don't work Sundays. But now you're starting to, you talk with them about buying a house. Are you going to be a good fit for each other, or is it going to be a problem? right? You're not available on Monday, Wednesday, Friday evenings, and they want to look at houses every Monday and Wednesday evening. They want to buy only in this particular neighborhood, and you necessarily don't like to go to that particular neighborhood because it's too far for you and there's tons of traffic, or you just don't want to work in that neighborhood. So you need to get to know each other, talk about things, and then come to an agreement how you're going to work together. That's really how it's going to help you the most. Okay. Am I back or am I out? I don't know. I've never seen it this bad before. How about now? Yes? Yeah, I'm sorry, you guys. I've never seen it really this bad before. This is like the worst this is the worst we've ever seen it. All right.
I'm sorry I caused that.
I knew it was Brian. I'm like, son of a gun, this dude's killing me, man. All right. So let's talk about, we talked a little bit about dual agency, but let's take a step back. Single agency is pretty simple. What does it mean? Usually the agent is working on behalf of the buyer, and then you have another agent working on behalf of the seller, and each person has their own representation. Single agency. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So remember, you will owe the fiduciary obligations just to that one party. Okay? Then we have dual agency, which I think we talked about, where remember, here's where things get a little bit tricky too. Here I am, let's say, working at Berkshire Hathaway, right? We have like 60 offices throughout Connecticut and New York and a little bit of Mass Rhode Island, okay? So if I have a listing here in East Hartford and someone who works with Berkshire Hathaway in Stamford brings me a buyer, is that dual agency? Yes or no?
It's the same broker?
It's the same broker code. So yes, right? That would be considered dual agency because it's the same broker. But things get a little bit tricky. Like I think we talked about in a previous class, right? Some of these are franchises where they're owned by different brokers with different broker codes. So for example, you might have a listing by, let's say, Century 21 All Access America, right? A listing by Century 21 All Access. But then somebody brings a buyer from Century 21 Classic Homes. So you see, those are two different brokers. And so that is still considered to be single agency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Rob, I think you had mentioned once before that Berkshire Hathaway is not the actual name for here. It's like for the region, it's like Northeast or New England properties, right? Is that
Yeah, so
like if is Berkshire Hathaway selling property in New Hampshire the same as the one company selling in Connecticut that you're working for?
no, because they have other Berkshire Hathaway franchises.
Okay, all right.
So we have like Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Florida Realty. That's technically a franchise of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services. We have Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, California something. I forget what the name is. But the whole point is that those are different franchises. Yeah. Yep. So things get a little bit crazy, but remember, it's important to make sure the whole point is about disclosure. So here's an example. You are selling this house. Okay. Now, again, somebody from your company, another salesperson, but it's the same company, Okay. Nothing? I'm just not sure why we're having this issue. Hey, Brian, you're back. How about now? Let me see something else. Uno momento, please. Yeah, it's something with the internet. My CPU is only running at 29%, 26%, 24%. My memory is at 30 something percent. It's the internet going on and off. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So here you are. You're selling this home in Manchester, Connecticut, right? And you work for 123 Realty, right? And another agent from the same company comes with a buyer. When do you have to let your seller know? That's considered to be dual agency, the same brokerage. When do you have to let your seller know that this offer is from an agent with the same company?
Would it be right away?
That's right. Before, believe it or not. So here's a really big thing. It's before you even review the offer with them. See, that's a key point, right? So here, again, the same company agent comes to you and has the offer. Now you call up the seller. You can't call up the seller and say, "Hey, I just want to let you know, we had the house listed for 300. We got you an offer for 305. You're going to be so excited and bum, 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 bum." And they're like, "Oh my God, that sounds great." And then you can't say, "Oh, and by the way, it's from another agent in my office." Because you see, now something doesn't exactly sound right to the seller. Or you can't say, "Oh yeah, and by the way, it's from a buyer that I met at the open house." And then they're going to be like, "Oh, wait a minute. So you are going to get both sides of the commission?" Right? Now things seem a little bit weird to them. But if you call them up and say, "Hey, Mr. Seller, I just want to let you know, there's an agent in our office, Mary. She has this buyer. I guess she's been working with her, showing her a bunch of houses. And, they're from the same company. They just made an offer to us. And they made an offer for 305. What do you think? How does that sound to you? I'd like to email you over the offer, see what you think about it." You see, that's a total different thing than, "Oh, and they're from the same office." So you have to let them know in the beginning before, and that's going to be, you're going to notice some of the things we're talking about, right, are going to be in your red book, right? And that's the Connecticut Principles and Practices. That is a Connecticut requirement, is to disclose the agency, if it's dual agency, before you review the offer with the seller. So that's really, really important. Does that make sense? So who's got questions on that?
I just, it might not be too relevant, but in that type of situation, you mentioned the person saying, "Well, wait, they're going to get both sides of the commission." That is the case, though, wouldn't it be?
It is the case, yes. But see, it makes a difference in how you sow the seed and how you present it. Because a lot of times they just don't feel right that you're maybe trying to hide something if you don't present it the upfront way. Right? That's a big issue. And sometimes it becomes a big issue. So let's talk about the next step. So I'm going to tell you, so we're going to talk about different options, because we also have a scenario called designated agency. So here you are, you went on this listing presentation, you worked your butt off to try to get this listing, you were sending out postcards, mailings, you were doing newspaper ads, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Craigslist, flyers, letters, these are all the things you need to do if you want to be a good real estate agent. And now you finally get somebody who says, yeah, I would love for you to sell my house. You've been in touch with me and I really appreciate it. And you're like, oh, okay, great. I appreciate working for you. No sound. How about now? Man, why is today gotta be like that? It's crazy.
Yeah.
All right.
You went completely digital, Rob. It is the worst it's ever been. We've never had this problem with.
No, I mean, we've had it like intermittently here and there. I just wondering if like, what the heck is going on? I really, you know what I'm gonna do, you guys? I'm gonna. It only takes 70 seconds. I'm gonna shut the computer down and turn it back on again, just for the heck of it. Okay? I'm sorry. We'll see you later. End meeting. I gotta do end meeting.
Coffee break.
Yeah, take a quick coffee break.
All right.
Do we have to log back on?
I don't know.
Yeah, we will, but that's all right. We might.
Oh, okay.
Really? And Cliff's got the hot coffee. So here we are. Yeah.
Coffee break.
Here we are. We left off talking about discussing designated agency. So you did all this work to get this listing appointment. You went, you talked to the seller, and they said, yeah, we'll sell the house with you, blah, 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 blah. Oh, and by the way, and they say, how much is your fee? My fee is 6%. Okay, that sounds good. But just so you know, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to really work hard on finding the buyer. Okay, that sounds great. And now you do they want you to put it in the newspaper? Even though hardly anybody looks at the newspaper. Do sellers want you to put it in the newspaper? Yes. Do they want you to spend as much time and money and energy on selling their house? Yes. Do they want you to do an open house? Yes. You do the open house, now you get a buyer for the house. And then you go and you tell them, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I got you an offer for the house. And they're, God bless you, Kristen. And they say, oh, so you mean you're representing both parties? But I thought you were just going to represent us. Do you think that ever happens? And now they're saying, well, I don't know 100% if I actually feel comfortable with that. And while they're saying that, and you're looking at the looks on their faces, what's your wallet doing? It's getting thinner and thinner, and you're seeing the money start flying away. Because what's happening? Well, now you have to get another agent involved. Right? And you might have to tell them, oh, and okay, Mrs. Seller, I understand you don't feel comfortable with that. So I can talk to my broker, I can talk to my manager, and we can discuss if we can get somebody else from our office to represent the buyer. And is that other agent going to work for free? No way. And then, so now you see the money just got cut in half. So that's a big issue, and that's where it becomes designated agency. So where the broker or the manager or whoever it might be has to designate one person to work for the buyer and designate another person to work for the seller, even though it's the same brokerage. So that's the difference you see between dual agency versus designated agency. Does everybody see the difference with that? Who's got questions on dual agency or designated agency? None? No questions? All right. Non-agency. Can we do that in Connecticut?
No.
No. No non-agency. Each party has to be represented. They can't just be like, somebody can't just do a job in order to just do the paperwork. And I guess in your yellow book, they sometimes refer that as ministerial acts. So no ministerial acts. Is the computer slowing down again?
Yes.
I saw a little delay happen. That's why I got, well, what the heck's going on? All right. Termination of agency. So when we talk about termination of agency, may be terminated for number one, completion, performance, or fulfillment. So again, they hire you to help them buy a house. You help them buy a house, and so now the buyer rep agreement is terminated. Listing agency agreement. They hired you to sell their house, you sold their house, and now that agreement is terminated. Make sense? How about death or incapacity of either party? So if the salesperson passes away, is the listing agreement still in place? Yes. Because
Yes.
who do the agreements belong to?
Broker.
The broker. And that's where we started talking a little bit, Cliff, last time about, technically our broker for Berkshire Hathaway is called CTRE LLC. So it's not necessarily a person most of the time if the person handles it the right way. Right? It's usually like a designated agency or whatever it might be. Okay? Destruction or condemnation of the property. So if the property burns down or gets destroyed, is the listing agreement or agency agreement terminated? Most of the time, yes.
Yeah.
Expiration of the terms. So remember, whether it's a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement, you're supposed to have a start date and an end date. And at the end date, if it's not renewed, it's terminated. The agreement's terminated. Does that make sense? Okay. Mutual agreement by all parties to cancel it. Breach by one of the parties. So as we discussed, how can a seller breach a listing agreement? What's an example of maybe a seller breaching a listing agreement?
How about agreeing to a price and then to sell and then reneging on it when that offer's made?
Yeah, exactly. How about a buyer? How can a buyer breach an agreement? How can a buyer breach a buyer rep agreement?
Well, how about if they use another real estate agent?
Simple as
besides
that.
you? Do they do that? Right?
Yeah. How about I'll give you an easy. Well, I'll answer a harder one maybe. How will a buyer agent breach a buyer rep agreement? Well, maybe that buyer agent's never available. Maybe that buyer agent is not getting back to the client. Maybe that buyer agent is not disclosing information. Right? How about this is a big one, especially for newer agents necessarily. And it's just, I don't know, again, it's no disparagement against newer agents. It's just maybe things come with experience or knowledge or whatever it might be. But how will a seller's agent, God forbid, breach an agreement, breach a listing agreement? How will a seller's agent breach a listing agreement?
How about not doing all the things they said they would do to sell the house?
Right? That's the biggest thing, is over-promising.
Yeah.
You say you're going to do this, and this, and then you don't do it. See, the things that I tell my clients are concrete items. Like, hey, if you give me the listing agreement, here's the things I'm going to do. I'm going to do this, boom, 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 boom. And then I actually have a checklist, and I don't do it all the time, but a lot of times, or I'm ready if a seller is feeling, maybe not 100%, like, hey, did you do this or that? I'll send them over my checklist and be like, look, here's all the things I said I was going to do, and here's where we're at on the list of the checklist of things.
Rob,
yes,
you're in essence, that's what your 6% commission is. In essence, is that you're paying for the agent to do all of this selling and find you the buyer and do the marketing and all of this. But my question becomes: is that marketing fee, the money that you spend to market that property, is that coming out of the broker's cut or is it coming out of your cut?
It depends on who you're with and what they're
Okay,
willing
if
to
I'm
do.
with you, is it the broker's cut or?
So it depends. So like you want to put it in the Hartford Current, we can't promise we'll put it in the Hartford Current every week, but we can definitely promise we'll put it in there as a new listing. We'll put it in there as a price reduction. We'll put it in there for open houses.
No, I get that part, but is that commission, are those fees that you have to pay to market, is that being paid for by the broker or is it being paid by the agent? Because
Right.
you're gonna, somebody's gotta either that $500 marketing fee's got to get paid for by somebody. Is it, are you fronting the money up as the agent or is the broker fronting the money? And then does that money, when the commission gets paid, is the broker being made whole, or are you out, or is that your expense?
Okay. So here's kind of how some of the stories go. Okay. And so this is one of the many reasons why I merged, they call it acquisition, with Berkshire Hathaway instead of having my own real estate company. So it's a myriad of things. There's no exact, but here's some of the basic things. For instance, the signage. Berkshire Hathaway and my team, we pay for the signs and we pay for the signs to be installed. Right? But if the agent wants a rider with their picture on it, they gotta buy that themselves. But we pay for the signs and the regular signs and for the signs to be installed. Right? The Hartford Current, Berkshire Hathaway will pay for that. The agent doesn't have to deal with that. I mean, I used to have to spend like $600 a month at Hartford Current. But let's say the agent promised professional pictures, photographer. The agent's got to pay for those themselves if they want professional pictures by a photographer. So there's a list of all these different things. And that's what I love personally. And I'm not trying to sway you one way or this or that, but that's what I love about Berkshire Hathaway. The things that are most important to me, they're mostly paying for. But you can go to a company that they'll say, oh, we're going to give you 80% commission from the start and we're going to do this and do this and do that. But then you're going to find out, okay, you got to buy your own business cards. You got to buy your own yard signs. You have to pay for them to get installed. You got to put in your own Hartford Current ads. You got to put in your own Zillow Premier listing ads, which that might, and the list goes on. So it's a difference between the net and the gross.
Sure.
So and that's what makes a lot of different brokers different too. What they're willing to put up and what they're not willing to put up. And that's part of your negotiating too with your brokerage.
Well, because you're technically an agent, an independent contractor, and all of those things that I would put out of pocket become business expenses for me to sell that contract or sell that property. Yeah. So that's why I was curious. At the end of the day, if the broker is actually covering that, then that's not a write-off for me. But if I'm paying for it out of my commission, then I got to be sure to track that so that I can write it off. Otherwise, I'm paying taxes on it, and
That's right. So you want to make sure you're taking advantage of every deduction you can.
Sure.
Business expenses. And the people who are most successful are the ones who really understand this is a business. You have to treat it like a business. It's not something, I hope you're not necessarily, anybody's not one of those people that say, oh, well, I want to get into real estate because I just really love houses. I just really love houses. You know how many times I have somebody say that? I just really I like to walk through houses and, and just like stage furniture and I just think it's fun. So I'm going to get into real estate. Well, I don't know what's going to happen. You might be paying a whole bunch of money and time.
Stop picking on me, Rob.
Right, it's all good because if you don't love it, then why do it?
Yeah.
But when I go through, I just hear cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching.
I honestly don't really care about houses. I really don't. You know what I love is helping people. And I love seeing people at the closing table, when they get their keys and they're all pumped up. Or what I also love, and I have my master's degree in it, is marketing. I love to be oh, wow, here's these things that I did. And now I ended up getting, how come I did this, but I only got 3 leads, but I did this and I got 30 leads. I love that, the prospecting of it. like going after the hunt. And then I love at the end seeing the people like, thank you so much, Rob. We're moving down to Georgia and we're all pumped up. This was awesome. And that's what I love. I can care less about these houses. I really can. I mean, I don't love houses. I mean, I like to have a nice house, but some people are just so into the house, like they're walking through the house. And then that's not the business, man. The business is like, figuring out ways that you're going to help your client and make them happy and make them feel like satisfied with your service. That's what I love about things. Or like somebody like a or it doesn't have to be a young person, but somebody who's like, oh man, I'm gonna be a landlord and I can I'll buy this 3-family and then I'll buy another one and I'm gonna do this and then I'm like, yeah, I can help you do that. And they're amazed by it. That's the stuff that I love, seeing the people's faces and being amazed by that stuff. So, okay. Another termination by operation of law. So like bankruptcy. So if somebody's going through bankruptcy, the listing agreement could be, that's it, terminated. That's it. They can get out of it because they're going through bankruptcy. Bankruptcy terminates the agency contract. Okay, or it could be a court order, that sort of thing. So those are the terminations of agency. Who's got questions about that? Customer level services. So remember, even though somebody's not your client, which that's what I make the big deal about, you still, if they're a customer in the marketplace, they call you up, you never met them before, they are a customer, and they say, oh, that home over there on Main Street, how much is it listed for? You can't just be like, I think it's like 140s, even though you know it might be 130s. Or you can't, not tell them that the basement floods. You have to still give them honest, fair dealings and disclose all the facts that you know about properties, even if they're a customer and not necessarily a client. But we also have a little term called puffing. So who knows what puffing is? Anybody get an idea what puffing is?
Exaggerating. Sound better. Exaggerate.
Yeah, so can I tell you, oh, this home right here has the most beautiful sunset of any other home in the neighborhood. Can I say that? Yeah, that's an opinion. Right? Can I tell you, oh man, this patio right here with the way that the sun rises off of it, you're not going to find a better more relaxing area. Or this kitchen right here is gorgeous. You're not going to find a kitchen like this in this neighborhood. This is the most beautiful kitchen in this neighborhood. Yeah. See, those are opinions. That's like telling you, oh, it's so nice. It's so beautiful. Oh my goodness. You got to be in this house. Are you kidding me? You can relax on the front porch with your family and dee. But there's sometimes, if you're not careful, right, you have to understand there's a difference between puffing and then being fraudulent. Fraudulent is saying it has 4 bedrooms when it only has 3. Fraudulent is saying it has 2,200 square feet when it's only 2,000. Fraudulent is saying, oh yeah, you can buy it for like about 170 when you know it's listed for 175, right? Intentional misrepresentations that might take advantage of somebody or harm them or make them entice them in a fraudulent way, lying. So you can't just outright lie, but you can exaggerate the benefits of a home. Make sense? All right, so who knows what negligent misrepresentation is? You should have known. So can you go and sell a big 10,000 square foot mansion in Greenwich if you want to once you get your real estate license? Yeah, you can do it. But if you're not familiar with that and you start telling this buyer, oh yeah, and you can have a horse here, and oh yeah, it's no problem. You want to put an in-ground pool over here? Yeah, you can definitely do that, right? If they tell you that these certain things are material to them, that this is what they want to do, and you're agreeing to it, you're telling them, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem, shouldn't be a problem. See, and then they find out that they couldn't do those things, you could be held liable. Right? You could be held liable for something that you should have known or that you misrepresented on purpose or even accidentally. So, like, for instance, you can't say you're the Glastonbury expert, right? And then somebody buys a house and they tell you, listen, I want to make sure that I'm near the high school because I don't want my son having to walk more than a quarter mile to school. Because God forbid, some parents, I know none of you are like this. But, some parents, they don't want their child, their 17-year-old walking down the street by themselves. That's very dangerous. Right? Even though when I was 14, 13, I was doing whatever I wanted to do, right? But anyways, I want to be within a quarter mile from the high school. And now you show them the house, you tell them, oh yeah, you see that school right there? That's the high school. And then come to find out it's the elementary school, but they already put the offer on the house. Could they try to sue you? They could try to sue you because they told you quarter mile from the high school. They asked you before they made the offer. You thought you knew the schools in Glastonbury, but really you don't know anything about Glastonbury. You just wanted to be an agent in Glastonbury because you think they have all the highest priced houses. So you were trying to be something you weren't. They went under contract because of something you told them. Could you be held liable and maybe even get sued? Yeah. See, so that's why you have to be very, very careful with what you say and how you do it. And make sure you understand what you're saying. So, does that make sense to you? Negligent misrepresentation?
Yeah.
All right. Latent defects. So what's an example of a latent defect? Anyone?
Something that wouldn't be found in an ordinary inspection.
Right? Something that wouldn't be found in ordinary inspection. So, and are real estate agents held responsible for latent defects? No. So that's the big thing that they want you to know. That it might be a hidden structural defect that would not be discovered by ordinary inspection. Right? Somebody made an offer. Maybe they even hired the real estate agent. They hired the home inspector, and the home inspector didn't find anything. But then they move into the house, and a month later they find out that the back corner of the attic, which nobody can get to unless they crawl here, 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 and here, is all filled with mold. So can you get in trouble for that? No, you didn't know about it. As long as you didn't know about it. You didn't know about it. Their inspector didn't find it. That would be considered a hidden defect or structural defect, where maybe that's a finished base. See, like finished basements are very dangerous, right? Because you can't necessarily see the joists and you can't necessarily see if there's mold in the basement and what's behind those walls and so forth. So sometimes, thank God I've never had a big issue. But something could turn up, especially with those finished basements, that there could be a big time problem, and then you as a real estate agent most likely will not be held responsible. So does that make sense about a latent defect, so that somebody can't go back to? All right, stigmatized properties. What's a stigmatized property?
A property with a bad reputation, or something like there was a murder there.
Yeah.
Or something.
How about, we talked about this just like last week or the week before, right? How about someone says, hey, the seller who's living there now, do they have AIDS?
Or COVID.
Well, see, that's the issue that I'm getting to. This is where everything's getting crazy. So if I talk to you before March, right, and a stigmatized property might be a property where the owner has AIDS, or has, I'm just gonna make it up, tuberculosis, or has what's the one that nobody gets anymore, that puts in the Bible all the time? Leprosy, right? Leprosy. I never met. Is there such a thing anymore? Right? But the person who lives there has some sort of disease that people can catch, right? Well, if you talk to me before March, I'm supposed to tell you I'm supposed to tell you that, hey, that is through HIPAA laws, we're not obligated to disclose that. Right? And so you can't ask that question. It doesn't make a difference. Okay? But now now that COVID is here, we have to have people fill out questionnaires. Is that HIPAA violations? It's kind of a little tricky, isn't it? Because now we have to have people, we've had to have people, I have to ask them 4 or 5 questions. Are you sick? Is anybody in your family sick? We're even asking people, in order to show the house, we have to ask the buyers questions about their family members. Have they been exposed to anybody? How many children do you have? How many people in your family have anybody been exposed to COVID? And if they answer yes, then we can't show them the house. Or we have buyers who say, I want to know if anybody in the household has COVID before I go view it. And no longer is anybody mentioning HIPAA violations. But the point is, stigmatized properties, right? In the state of Connecticut, the way that it works is that if the answer to the question will persuade them is a material fact, meaning depending upon the answer will persuade them to buy or not buy, then they should be asking the question in writing, and then you will have ask the seller to respond in writing. Because, people ask questions. Oh, is that the house where somebody got murdered in? Right? Did I ever tell you the story about Cisco? Right? So here's my buddy Cisco. Here's a old Spanish guy. He loved me to death. He still does. We're under really good terms, right? I actually just talked to him like about 2 months ago. In fact, I got to call him, see how he's doing. But there was a rough moment there for a few minutes. So the point is this guy loved me. We went and looked at a bunch of houses together. We had lunch together a few times. He couldn't find a house that he wanted because I knew he was being picky, but he kept blaming it on his wife. Oh, my wife is not going to like this one, Rob. But no, we go look at another. Come on. So we looked at I don't know how many houses together. Now, finally, I find the house that he loves, right? And now it's the closing day, and we're doing the pre-closing walkthrough. So that morning, we're at the house. I get to the house a few minutes early. We're going to walk through the house, and then we're going to go to the closing together. And then I told him if he wants to get some lunch or something, we can do that. Okay. So I get to the house. I'm standing at the front steps, and I always used to mess with him whenever I saw him. He gets out of the car. I'm like, Cisco, hey, right? So he gets out of the car. I'm like, Cisco, hey, how you doing? He's like, don't talk to me. I don't like you no more. I'm like, are you joking with me? He's like, no, I'm serious. Don't talk to me. I don't like you no more. I don't even want to buy this house. The deal, everything is off. I'm like, dude, what's the matter? What happened? What do you mean? He says, my daughter, she did the research on the internet, and she found out that 3 years ago, there was a drive-by shooting at this house, and you didn't tell me. So I don't like you no more, and I'm not buying this house. Right? So at first I thought he was joking, but I'm like, man, this guy's serious. So then I stopped, at the door. I'm like, talk to me. What do you mean? He says, my daughter found out there was a shooting 3 years ago at this house. He goes, and you didn't tell me. I said, Cisco, do you think every single house that I help somebody with, I start going on the internet and searching for a half an hour to see if I could find if somebody did a shooting or there was a criminal action or something like that? He's like, oh, well, you didn't tell me. I said, I didn't know. I said, but listen, if you want me to find out about what happened, because it's the same seller who's been living here for 6-7 years, I can ask the question. He's like, oh, no, forget it. They're not going to tell you the truth anyways. I said, well, then what do you want to do? He's like, all right, come on, we'll buy the house. I'm like, you still mad at me? He's like, nah, I'm not mad at you no more. But anyways, the whole point, right, is that house could have been, and it was on the market for a while. I guess it could have been stigmatized, that he was afraid that this was a house where there were drug dealers in or something, and that people were doing drive-by shootings. So if I was going to ask the seller, I would ask them directly, or I would have to ask them in writing so that they can respond in writing what exactly happened. Does that make sense to everybody? Right? So stigmatized properties are important to make sure that you discuss. If there's an issue, you tell them, listen, write your question down, and then I will give it to the seller, and the seller will respond. Because you might think you already know the answer, and that's where it's an issue. That's where it's a problem, especially if you are the listing agent. Because if you give the answer the way you think it is, could your seller get mad at you? Could you put your seller at a disadvantage? Yeah, that's where Megan's Law comes into place. I think I told this last week. Didn't I tell the story last week about Megan's Law? Anybody was here? No? So, this is the whole thing about stigmatized properties. Megan's Law is another kind of issue that's combined with that. Fiduciary obligations. All this stuff, ethical issues, everything came into place in one. It was the perfect storm when I was at this house in Hartford with my 6-7-year-old triplets. Anybody remember that story? Then we're gonna wrap up the class, and then I'm gonna throw you for a loop on our scheduling. But we got about 10 minutes, so let's go through just this story, and then we'll do just a review of the unit. But here's the whole point, talking about, think about all these things. Stigmatized properties, fiduciary responsibilities, Megan's Law, everything put together. So I had gotten divorced, and here I was with my kids. They're like 6-7-year-old triplets. It was a Sunday morning, and previously, this old Portuguese guy asked me. He had a nice little 3-family house in an area of Hartford that I didn't spend a lot of time in, okay? And he asked me to rent out these 3 apartments for him. So I'm like, yeah, I could do that for you, no problem. Okay, I need them rented out right away, as soon as possible, Rob. You do this for me, and then when I buy some more multifamilies, I'm going to call you up, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, no problem. And this is like 2006, 2007. The market's tough. We need the money. I'm the sole source of income for my kids. I got to rock and roll. And I got these triplets, right? And they're like 6-7 years old. And it was a Sunday morning, hot summer day, like July or August. And I had to work. So I'm like, oh man. So I met this woman. I just talked to her on the phone a couple of times. She's like, oh, you got to show me some apartments, please. I said, listen, I really can't work tomorrow because I got my kids. She's like, that's okay. I got a couple kids. I'll bring mine too. It's no big deal. I'm like, are you sure? Because I feel kind of weird about it. She's like, no. Bring your kids and we'll take a look at these apartments. I really need an apartment right away. Okay. I appreciate that. Just so you know. So I'm bringing my kids. So here I was, got there a few minutes early. We're on the front porch of this 3-family. It's a hot summer day. It's like 10:30, 11 o'clock. Everything's just starting to heat up. Across the street, there's this little bodega. There's all kinds of music coming out of there. Directly across the street, there's like a brick building with all these people, and then there's all these multifamilies around. And then I got my kids running back and forth. I'm like, come on. They got energy. I look to my right side, and I see some dude. He's all like this, and he's smoking a cigarette. He's wearing a white tank top, and he's looking at me and giving me a dirty look. He's giving me dirty looks. So I'm like thinking to myself, oh great, what the heck's going on? And he's looking at me again. Then I see him out of the corner of my eye. He's at the next house over, you know, on that front porch. And he takes a cigarette, throws it on the ground, and now he's walking down that sidewalk, and then he's walking towards the house where I am. And I'm like, this dude, and he's looking at me, he's coming to start a problem with me. So I'm like, what the heck? So I look at my kids. There were some chairs, some old beat up chairs on the front porch. I'm like, sit down, you guys, sit down. So I take a couple steps down, and I'm like, dude, so what's going on? He comes walking right up to my face out of nowhere. I never met this guy before. I'm like, dude, I got my kids here. Listen, man, I don't want a problem. Listen, I'm just here to show a couple of apartments. I don't need any issues over here. You know, I'm not going to have a fight in front of my kids. You know, what the heck's going to happen? He's like, I said, I don't want any problems. I said, I'm not from around here, man. Just, you got to show a couple. He's like, that's your problem, man. He's like, you're not from around here, are you? I said, no. And he's like, I said, no. And so he's like, his back is facing the street, right? He's like, you see those buildings? There's two big brick buildings right behind him. He said, you see those two brick buildings behind me? He's like talking softly. I said, yeah. He's like, you see those guys looking at your kids? And I'm like, you didn't really notice until you really looked. And I looked, and it seemed like not every single window, but I'm telling you, like 85, 90% of those windows, where there's like 20 windows, there's guys looking out at us. And I'm like, I wasn't really noticing that because it was like a summer day. I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, those guys, he says, they just got out of those are sex offenders that they come here when they just get out of jail before they go to their own place. He's like, and they're checking your kids out, man. I'm like, oh, man, dude. I said, I didn't know. He's like, that's right, you didn't know. He's like, why don't you wake the F up? I'm like, oh. And as soon as he says that to me, what happens? Boom comes driving up is the lady who wants to rent out the apartment, and who comes running out of the car is two kids who are like 6 and 7 years old, 5, 6, 7, the same age as my kids. And you know how young kids are when they're together, and the kids now run into each other. They just met each other, and before you know it, they're looking at each other. Now they're almost like best friends. She's like, oh, thank you so much for coming and showing me the apartment today, Rob. I appreciate it. And she comes walking right by me and the guy. He walks away. Now I'm thinking to myself, I look across the street. I'm like, oh, man. So there's it's a whole thing of a whole building, couple buildings of sex offenders checking out the kids. And I got this woman with her two little kids who want to rent one of these apartments. So number one, at that very moment, do I have fiduciary obligations to the landlord? Yeah. And if I tell her, I forget her name, but if I tell her, hey, Mary, don't rent here because across the street is a bunch of sex offenders, right? And she says, and she decides that she wants to talk to the landlord or something. She tells the landlord, oh, well, Rob told me not to rent because they're sex offenders. Could I get in trouble? Yeah. So what was I supposed to do? So now we're walking up we decided we're going to show her the second and third floor. We're walking up to the second floor, and I'm like, oh, I said, you know, these apartments on the second, third floor, they get really hot. I don't know if it's going to work for you. And what is she saying? Oh, that's no problem. That's no problem. And I said, I don't know. These bedrooms are a little bit small. I don't know if it's going to work for you. Oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. What do I need to do to fill out the application? And the kids are running back and forth. And I look out the front window of this second floor apartment that we're in. And still there's all these guys like this looking out the windows. So ethically, right? Personal wise, do I want to see Channel 61 news that something happened to one of these kids? No. Business ethically, do I want to lose my license, get suspended or revoked? No. Right? So what did I do? As I told her, I said, listen, if you want, I said, how much do you know about this area? And she's like, I don't know, I really haven't spent much time here. I said, well, listen, because she was like, I want to fill out an application right away. And I said, listen, if you want to fill out an application right away, we can. And I'm sure the landlord is going to let you rent the place. But if I was you, one of the things I would do is go on the internet, look up the school reports, and you might even want to go to a website called Megan's, I forget what the exact name of it, but the whole thing about Megan's Law, and check to see if there's any sex offenders in the area. Maybe that would be important to you. And she's like looking at me. She's like, well, what do you mean? I said, I just think it's important for you to know the area, but if you still want to rent it, you can rent it. You see? So I don't know if you feel that's the whole thing about fiduciary obligations. Now, she ended up kind of looking at me in the eye, and I was like kind of looking at her in the eye like it's not a good idea and that you should really check out the sex offenders list. Because I said, yes, you can go to any town in Connecticut, any town around Northeast, well, the populated areas, you'll find sex offenders there. I mean, I think it's absolutely disgusting and so forth and so on. I don't have to explain that. But I do know somebody that they even were driving home from this was like 20 years ago. They were driving home from a Patriots football game, and they stopped on the side of the highway to urinate, and then the state cops pulled over, and the guy got a little bit wise with the state cop. He wasn't being appropriate. The state cop said, hey, what are you doing? The guy started yelling. This was a friend of a friend, but the guy started yelling back at the state cop because he was belligerent and drunk. And the cop charged him with public, what do they call it? Public indecency or something. And he's on the sex offenders list just for stopping on the side of the highway after a football game, being drunk and being a wise guy with the cops. So I know there's a few people that maybe it's not the worst, but the whole point is I didn't want to see a problem with those kids. And so the fiduciary obligations, ethicals, issues, morals, they're all going to come up, and you got to know how to handle it and be really careful. So she didn't end up getting that rental. I ended up renting it to somebody else, and I was happy because it was like young people that they were going to Trinity College or something like that. So that's like the story. But see, some things get a little bit crazy, right? So anyways, I don't know if you learned anything from that, but sometimes you go in the gray area pretty quick and easy. Okay, so before we got a couple more minutes, who's got questions on this unit? It's a very important one. So what I want you to do, because it kind of has the last two units together, is make sure you go through this unit and then go over unit 1 in the red book. Go over unit 1 in the red book and make sure you're doing the questions at the end of each unit. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do, which, hey, I apologize, it's not a big deal. It's only a big deal if you make it, is we're going to totally switch around. Because like I said, every 3 months, we end up on the same units with the morning and the evening. And that's what pretty much happened like last week. Because remember, okay, so I know this gets tricky for everybody. Monday night, Thursday night, and Saturday morning are on the same loop. Tuesday morning, Friday morning are on the same loop. Tuesday morning and Friday morning are on the same loop. Monday night, Thursday night, Saturday morning are on the same loop. So we have to change our loop so we're not on the same with the morning classes. So I'm thinking we're going to just double it up. And on Thursday, we're going to go over Unit 18. Is anybody really angry about that? Like you feel like you're being slighted somehow? It won't make a difference. So Thursday night, I'm going to tell Matt, I'm going to text him, you're going to do Unit 18 in the yellow. You're going to study it before then. You're right. Unit 18, fair housing. Make sure you write this on your log. Don't come back to me and say, hey, Rob, how many more hours do I have? Because you have to put it on your log. Each class is worth 2 hours. So it's 18 in the yellow. And then you're going to look up the red, and you're going to look up the same title, fair housing. And you're going to notice that that is unit what in the red? That is unit 15 in the red. So it's 18 in the yellow, fair housing. right? And then unit 15 in the red, fair housing. Does